began about 6 o'clock in the morning with Maxine. Maxine was Mel's mother-in-law. Mel's full name was Mary Melissa, but we always called her Mel. But Maxine called. This was on 19th of July, 1989. She said Mel was missing from her workplace. Well, Ruth and I were a little bit surprised because Mel and her 3 children had spent the whole day at the farm about 3 weeks earlier, and she had told us then that she's working nights in a convenience store. So her mother and I decided that, well, we told her that that was too much of a dangerous job because there'd been some robberies at these convenience stores. Well, she agreed to give her 2 weeks' notice, and we thought that was it. Well, what had happened after she had finished her 2 weeks, one of the other girls had called in sick, so her supervisor called Mel to work one more night. Well, it turned out to be her last night. Now, Greg Braun, who was also a native of Garden City, had a drug problem, and he was after some more money to satisfy his drugs. And he'd already robbed another convenience store in Garden City, kidnapped the clerk, took her out in the country, brutally beat and raped her, and shot her in the head and left her body in the ditch. Then he came back into Garden City, and it just happened that Mel's store was close to the highway, and he decided to do this again. So he robbed her and forced her into the car and took her out nearly the same place where Barbara's body was, and forced her out in a wheat field and shot her twice in the back of the head. Then he came back into Garden City and went to bed. He lived with his parents yet. The next morning at the breakfast table, they had their television on, and it was on the news that these 2 ladies were missing from their workplace. And Greg's father was a prominent attorney there, and he told Greg that if he didn't stop using drugs, he may end up doing stupid like that, something stupid like robbing these clerks. Well, he didn't really realize what he'd done until he went out and checked his car and found Barbara's bloody clothes. The first lady was Barbara Kochendorfer. So then he realized that he was going to have to leave town. So he drove to Pampa, Texas, and held up a photo shop and killed that clerk, who was a Pete Spurrier. He then went on to Ardmore, Oklahoma, and robbed a florist shop. There's 3 ladies in there. One of them happened to be just a customer, but the other 2 were workers. Forced them to lay down on the floor and shot all 3 of them. Well, Gwen Miller was the owner's daughter that owned this florist shop. She's passed away, but the other 2 survived. This happened at 10 o'clock in the morning, 2 blocks from the police station. So he was getting braver all the time. Then he drove to Springer, New Mexico, held up a convenience store there and killed that clerk, Geraldine Valdez. Well, shortly after that, a sheriff's deputy discovered Geraldine's body and put out a roadblock, and they had Greg Braun arrested within the hour. Well, he went through all the court proceedings in New Mexico and was found guilty on everything. They brought him back to Garden City. Anyway, All this time, Ruth and I had never had supported capital punishment. But as I sat in that courtroom just a few feet from Greg Braun, I actually was summarizing how much damage I could do to him before the guards interfered. When you're suffering through a loss like we did losing Mel, it's normal to want revenge. And I was in that very revengeful mood at that time. But anyway, he was found guilty on all charges in Garden City and transported to Ardmore, Oklahoma. And he went through all the proceedings there and was given the death penalty. And then he was transferred to McAllister, where they do the final proceedings. Anyway, Sister Renee Drotting, she was a Dominican sister from Great Bend, but when Greg Braun lived in Garden City, she was a school teacher at St. Dominic's School. And she was Greg's 5th and 6th grade teacher. Well, she was one of the few people that was allowed to visit him at McAllister. So she came to the farm and visited Ruth and I, and she indicated that the only way that we would find peace is through acceptance and forgiveness. My first reaction was, "Are you kidding, sister?" But anyway, Ruth and I decided to write him a letter. We got a reply from him which was very cruel and obstinate. He actually blamed Mel for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so it was a while before we considered even pursuing another letter. But during this time, I had a neighbor who was a neighboring farmer who had lost his wife in a drunk driving accident. And he came to me out in the field one day, and he more or less indicated the same thing that Sister had suggested, that we needed to find forgiveness. Well, during this time, Sister had visited Greg and McAllister again, and she came to visit Ruth and I. And she said that Greg was remorseful and he wanted our forgiveness. He'd gone to confession and he was sorry for what he had done. Well, this was the first hope that Ruth and I felt that we could ever forgive someone that did something like this. So we wrote another letter. And Greg's reply then was a lot different than his first letter. We felt that he was truly remorseful and sorry for what he'd done, and asked for our forgiveness, which made us feel a whole lot better, but it was still very painful. And as another Dominican sister, Sister Jolene Geyer, a Dominican sister in Great Bend, she contacted us and asked if it would be all right for her to organize a prayer vigil for Greg Braun on the night of his execution, because by that time he was scheduled to die. Of course, we agreed to that, and several of our children joined us that night at the chapel in Great Bend. At the first thought, when I walked in that chapel, I thought, "Oh, this is strange." But it also felt so right to be there. And so we were actually in that chapel praying for the the person that murdered our daughter. The anger and the hatred that you suffer when you feel a loss like this will eat you alive. And the only relief you'll find is in you accept that what that person did and forgive that person. That's the only way you're going to find peace. Thank you.